Chapter 4. Late Night Ghost Talk. Later that night. Zongjong Mingjue had already gone down the mountain to do what Li Lianhua had asked. In the soft candlelight, Li Lianhua stood facing Yu Chuoshuang's body, which was still in the ice coffin. Yu Hongzhu was originally set to meet him there, but she had another matter to deal with. Now Li Lianhua was alone, staring at the half-burned, half-rotten body of the young woman. Ai, Li Lianhua sighed, shaking his head as he held the candle. Even though he had seen many corpses that were much more terrifying than this, he still felt that this killer had to be especially evil to do something so horrible to a young, innocent girl of only 17 or 18 years old. At the door, there were 2 Yu City swordsmen guarding the room. Li Lianhua gently opened the wound on Yu Chuoshuang's abdomen with a knife wrapped in a blue cloth. Yesterday, he had taken out a blood clot and saw the destroyed intestines, but now he didn't know what he was looking for. It was pitch black outside the window, and the clouds were thick. Neither the moon nor the stars were visible as Li Lianhua boredly examined Yu Chuoshuang's corpse. He used the knife to inspect her body, for Li Lianhua knew nothing about medicine. All he knew was to cut open people's stomachs to see if there was anything out of place. Truthfully, he had no idea how to perform an autopsy. He continued to inspect the body, his knife making creepy tap-tap-tap noises against the frozen skin. If one were to see Li Lianhua now, they would think he was having fun. As the swordsman outside the door stood quietly, there was a sudden commotion. In the dark night, a particular sound could be heard. It was the same song, the song of a broken tongue. The voice was coming from behind a big tree in the courtyard. The song only went on for a few lines, then stopped. The Yu City swordsmen looked at each other, shouted loudly to ask who goes there, and searched behind the tree. They found that the courtyard was empty due to the late hour, so the 2 leapt over the wall to search for the source of the song, the 2 of them going in opposite directions. Li Lianhua held the candle and smiled. Yu City swordsmen were known to be well-trained, and it seemed they were living up to their reputation. At the moment, there was no one around, and the night air was silent. It seems to be a night for ghosts to come out and scare people, Li Lianhua muttered. Then he yawned. I'd better go back to my room and hide. It's a little scary here. Suddenly, a gust of cool wind blew through the room, and a tall shadow suddenly appeared at the door, its disheveled hair completely covering its head and face. Li Lianhua's white robe fluttered in the breeze, and he whispered, "Well, that's quite terrifying." He carefully put the knife back into its blue satchel, and without looking back, he slowly turned and walked in the opposite direction of the shadowy figure. He hadn't noticed it standing at the door. The long-haired ghost stood at the front door, frozen. For a moment, it seemed to be trembling with anger as it stood there unnoticed. Then it quietly followed Li Lianhua into the room that he and Zongjong Mingjue shared. Yu Palace Guest Room. After Li Lianhua returned to the room, he lit a few candles and closed the doors and windows. Pausing, he thought for a moment before he decided to also lock the doors and windows. He really was afraid of ghosts. After all the doors and windows were locked, he breathed a sigh of relief, blew out the candles with confidence, climbed into the bed, covered himself tightly with the quilt, and fell asleep. After half an hour, the long-haired ghost quietly floated down from the beam above Li Lianhua's bed. It followed him in stealthily and jumped onto the ceiling beam at the same time as Li Lianhua entered the door, giving it time to hide. It approached Li Lianhua's bed without a sound, slowly lifting a small object that shone with cold light above the person beneath the quilt. After a moment, it slowly lowered its elbow. "Miss Yun?" A voice suddenly came out from under the quilt, and the person who spoke was calm, with no intention of being intimidating. Despite this, the long-haired ghost shuddered. "Master Zongjong is not here tonight." The long-haired ghost took 2 steps back, its elbow sinking. The small thing that shone with cold light slammed into the bed, and with a loud crash, the ghost plunged onto the bed. It retracted its elbow, and the room flashed with the cold light. The flashing thing was a dagger. Its sheath flew across the room, the blade having been drawn out with a shwah sound. The back of the blade was held against Li Lianhua's neck, each movement sharp and agile. This was not someone of average skill. Li Lianhua was still covered in the quilt as the cold blade of the dagger touched his neck in the wind. Suddenly, an area of the quilt shifted, and Li Lianhua knocked the wrist holding the dagger. There was a bang as the dagger was released, and it flew across the room as well, stabbing into the wooden door panel. The long-haired ghost was taken aback, exclaiming in surprise. The voice was that of a woman. Li Lianhua's voice came from beneath the quilt, and he sounded a bit helpless. Miss Yun, please be gentle with me. For some reason, he didn't come out from under the quilt, just hid beneath it and said, Master Zhongzhong is not here tonight. I must discuss this matter with you, Miss Yun. The long-haired ghost lowered its head, turned around quietly, and walked quickly to the door. It was about to open the door and escape, but suddenly found that the door was locked. The room could be locked from both inside and out, so it must have been locked with a special golden lock that needed a key to be opened. The figure turned around suddenly, pulled out the dagger from the door, and looked at Li Lianhua with a bit of fear. The ridiculous-looking lump beneath the quilt on the bed was very terrifying in its eyes. It seemed that the tables had turned tonight, and a ghost had fallen into a human's trap. But it only heard Li Lianhua's soft voice. Miss Yun must be underdressed tonight, so I won't look at you. The long-haired ghost was stunned. Its whole body seemed to tremble. Suddenly, it tore off its messy hair and took off its coat. You can come out from under the quilt now. The voice trembled. Li Lianhua slowly pulled down the quilt. The moment he did, Yun Jiao was relieved to see that it was a gentle face that didn't make people feel scared. I've seen this face before, she thought. When she realized that it was Li Lianhua, her whole body relaxed and she leaned back against the door panel. She took a deep breath and tears rolled down her cheeks as she slid to the ground. For a moment, the room was silent. Neither of them spoke until Yun Jiao suddenly said in a trembling voice, It wasn't me. Li Lianhua smiled softly. I know. Her whole body was limp as she sat on the ground along the door panel. How could you know? Qiu Shuang's intestines were destroyed by someone, but none of her bones were broken. It must be caused by someone hitting her lower abdomen with the splitting palm technique. You, Miss Yun, are not weak in martial arts, but your internal strength is not the best, Li Lianhua said matter-of-factly. Of course, it wasn't you who killed Qiu Shuang, but... He paused and then said slowly, You must be very clear with me about how Qiu Shuang died. Yun Jiao's face went pale and she didn't say a word. Li Lianhua kept smiling softly and said, Can you please tell me how she died? Yun Jiao shook her head slowly and firmly. Li Lianhua said slowly, Miss Yun, this is very important. I was only wearing a man's clothes tonight. How should I know? Qiu Shuang, she was killed by a ghost at Xiaomian Inn. What does it have to do with me? Yun Jiao's chest heaved with anger. Miss Yun, Li Lianhua said carefully, and suddenly her swirling emotions were calmed by Li Lianhua's soft voice. I haven't killed anyone. Really? Li Lianhua sighed. Since Cheng Yunhe told me that there was a ghost who killed someone, I knew that you had something to do with it. Hearing the ghostly song here yesterday confirmed this even more. Nonsense! Yun Jiao turned even more pale. You just listened to Madame Yu's nonsense. She's always disliked me. Li Lianhua looked at her and sighed again. Miss Yun, have you forgotten? Everyone, from Xiaomian Inn to Yu City, Cheng Yunhe fled, and Master Yu's swordsmen were forced to die. When you think about it, you're the only one with nothing to lose. He slowly raised his gaze and looked into Yun Jiao's eyes. Ghosts in the window have appeared in Xiaomian Inn, and also in the rooms of Yu Palace. The only person who has been present in these two places is you. So what? Yun Jiao bit her lip. It was a ghost, okay? I didn't kill her. He looked at her and smiled. He seemed to be able to tolerate her struggle and resistance. If I knew it was a ghost, I wouldn't lie. Her face turned pale in an instant. You lie. The strangest thing about the murder is that Qiu Shuang's body suddenly appeared in Cheng Yunhe's cargo box. Although the Crane Escort Agency isn't full of experts, they are famous for their reputation and are quite respected, Li Lianhua said warmly. Cheng Yunhe wouldn't lie. If he said that no one touched the cargo box, then no one touched it. But Qiu Shuang's body suddenly appeared in a box full of precious jewels that had never been touched. You see, it sounds impossible, but it's actually very simple. He smiled. As long as you think it through a bit, you will know how Qiu Shuang got into the box. After Yun Jiao's face turned dead pale, the tense atmosphere gradually softened. How? Cheng Yunhe may be an honest person, but that doesn't mean everyone else is. Li Lianhua maintained a calm and happy smile. Cheng Yunhe wouldn't lie, but you would. This matter is not surprising. She listened in silence as Li Lianhua continued. The Crane escorts didn't know that Qiu Shuang was at the inn that night, and that she was already dead before they saw her, did they? Yunjiao froze for a moment and nodded. The Yu Palace swordsmen who were there that night and escorted Qiu Shuang back to the city, they all died, right? Li Lianhua asked again. And Yunjiao nodded again. So in fact, Cheng Yunhe didn't know about Qiu Shuang's situation that night. Yu Palace swordsmen are famous for their well-trained skills. Qiu Shuang died suddenly, so nobody knew about her situation that night. Qiu Shuang's body was sent back to Yu City within half a month, so the swordsmen must have rushed back to there right away after traveling day and night. It's a pity that they all died as soon as they returned due to Yu Mulan's rage. Li Lianhua said slowly. So the rumors in the martial world and the information about Cheng Yunhe's knowledge of whether Qiu Shuang was dead or alive that night, all were told by her close friend, you, Miss Yun, and you were the only witness. So, what if you're lying? He looked into Yunjiao's eyes. Who knows what happened to Qiu Shuang that night? Yunjiao didn't answer. She was already going insane. If you're lying, then it's very obvious. Yu Qiu Shuang was in Cheng Yunhe's cargo box from the very beginning. Then Li Lianhua said in a gentle tone, the box hadn't been tampered with. Of course, someone touched the box, but that was originally how it had been. The body was found that night, so the whole thing isn't strange at all. And what if I'm not lying? Yunjiao asked in a low voice. Then that means that there really are ghosts in the world, he replied. But I'm afraid of ghosts, so I don't believe in them. No. She couldn't have been originally in the box. She didn't know him at all, Yunjiao said weakly. The box she was in was one of just 16 entrusted to Cheng Yunhe, Li Lianhua said. The boxes were originally from Yu City, so it wouldn't be unusual for Yu Qiu Shuang to be in one of them. How do you know they were from Yu City? She suddenly asked with an extremely horrified expression on her face. If things could be explained by deduction and guessing, how could this matter have been guessed out of thin air? Where was the evidence? After she shouted this, it was undoubtedly confirmed that the boxes were from Yu City. Li Lianhua smiled. Kunlun Mountain produces white jade. The stones on the mountain are mostly gravel, with jade veins in the middle. The Jade City was built on the jade mine and beside a glacier. The stones in the city are different from other places. The stones used to line the bottom of the box and the stones in the Yu Palace garden are the same. 10 of the 16 boxes of goods were filled with gold, silver, pearls, and jade. Yunjiao bit her pale and trembling lips. Yu City is as rich as a country. Too rich. Li Lianhua looked at her tenderly. 10 boxes of jewels is too much even for high-ranking officials and rich people, he said slowly. What's important is these goods came from Yu City. Anyone from Yu City would realize that. You lied about Qiu Shuang and the ghost shadows that appeared in the window. The fireflies. Miss Yun, it was not a ghost. Ghosts don't have to pretend to be ghosts. You, on the other hand, had to pretend to be someone. Yunjiao looked down at the clothes she was wearing and the disheveled hairpiece that was thrown on the ground, and the tears began to fall. You didn't kill Qiu Shuang, but who are you covering up for? Who are you pretending to be tonight? Then Li Lianhua said with a smile, Actually, as long as one realizes that Yu Qiu Shuang didn't die at Xiaomian Inn, it's easy to guess. But I hope you will not decide to take the blame because of this, Miss Yun. Yunjiao lowered her head slowly. Since you're so smart and can see through everything, why don't you just go and arrest the killer already? Li Lianhua shook his head. Since Qiu Shuang's death, you have been the one doing all the pretending and deceiving, haven't you? Including attempting to kill me tonight. The person you're protecting didn't plan on taking any of the danger themselves. Do you understand? Li Lianhua's eyes and tone were very gentle. It was a very genuine kindness, and he didn't intend to be hurtful at all. Yunjiao stared at him in a daze. She felt that the person in front of her was very familiar at the moment, as if she had seen him somewhere long before. But how could she have seen him? Or maybe it was just that she had spoken to a similar person before. I seem to have seen you somewhere, she murmured. Li Lianhua gave her a look as if to ask, Do you understand? Do I understand, you ask? Do I understand? Of course I understand, but I... Are you willing to give up your life for him? Li Lianhua asked suddenly. Her tears flowed faster. I don't know. Maybe. Li Lianhua stared at her for a moment, and then whispered, The wealth of Yu City is just harmful. Oh, I'm so sleepy. He suddenly pulled the quilt over his head and face. It's late. It's time for you to go back to your room, Miss Yun. Yunjiao was stunned. He had locked her in the room and interrogated her, seeing that she was pretending to be a ghost, and instead of arresting her and handing her over to Yu Hongzhu, he ordered her to leave. After a pause, she was neither frightened nor relieved, but embarrassed. The door, it's locked. Li Lianhua's voice came from under the quilt. Ah, yes, it's locked, but it's not closed. Not closed? She looked at the locked door in bewilderment. As expected, the golden lock was perfectly locked, but the upper, middle, and lower bolts were not inserted into the cracks of the door. The other end of the lock wasn't even attached to anything. It was all for show. For a moment, she didn't know whether to be surprised or angry, to cry or to laugh. She had no choice but to just push the door open in a daze as she exited the room, like a zombie.